name is Gail Heinemeyer, class of 1972. I'm one of the legacy students from Ursinus. My mother was a graduate of the class of 1940. Her name was Claire Burrell, and one of her claims to fame while here at Ursinus was the fact that she was the founder of Kappa Delta Kappa sorority. The reason that came about was that they had formed a friendship, about 6 women who were all living in what in those days was called South Hall. And when it came time to pledge for sororities, they were afraid that they might be split up. They wanted to maintain their friendship, so their solution was apply for a new sorority, which they did. And so Kappa Delta Kappa was founded while my mother was here, and she became the first president of that sorority. I kind of grew up with Ursinus because as my mother would come up for homecoming events and alumni weekends, she would drag me and my sister along, so we became very familiar with the campus. And as the time was approaching that I was beginning to think about where I was going to go to college, since I'd had such exposure to Ursinus, it certainly kind of rose to the top of the list. I also had a teacher in high school who was an Ursinus graduate, and she was very instrumental in kind of shepherding people that she knew might have a connection. So as a result, we were up here a number of times with her to watch the dress rehearsals for the Messiah performance. So another connection that kind of was bringing me back to come to Ursinus. I did apply for early acceptance, got that acceptance, and the next thing you know, in the fall of 1968, I arrived on campus, assigned to Schreiner Hall as my first dorm. I started out as a political science major, I started out as a math major. And after about the first year, I thought, that's not really where my interests lie. And so I changed majors at that point to political science, not really knowing exactly where that might lead to me, thinking I might go into teaching, thinking I might pursue law. Had some fabulous professors during that time, gentlemen like Gene Miller and Seed Pancoast, James Kraft, all of whom really instilled a love not only of political science, but of history in general. And I believe Seed was also a graduate of Ursinus, so again, that was always kind of woven into the stories. One of the things that I remember, an early recollection of Ursinus, was the fact that those 6 women that were part of the group of my mother's forming that KDK maintained a friendship for over 50 years by starting a round-robin letter. And someone would start that letter off, would write it, it would go to the next person who would add their letter, and it continued to be passed around and literally mailed around the country. One woman was in New York, one was in Chicago, one was out in Seattle, and for more than 50 years, faithfully, that letter made its rounds across the country, bringing people up to date on the families and what was going on in people's lives. We also had the shore connection, because the one woman from Chicago would come in to the East Coast every summer, rent a home down at the Jersey Shore, and there was always one day that was Ursinus Day. And so the women from KDK were invited with their families. So it was just always part of that culture and just thinking about Ursinus and obviously thinking about KDK. One of the things that I think is really interesting is the fact that there is that draw of coming back on a regular basis and staying connected. I remember my mother talking about the fact that you may have friends from high school, but the friends you'll have for all your life are the people that you meet in college. And so there are now 6 of us who, while we don't do the old handwritten letter process, we do keep in touch on a regular basis and have a mini reunion every year at the One Woman's House in North Jersey. So we've maintained those Ursinus connections over all of that time. I'm impressed, I think, now when I walk across the campus, thinking about the fact that probably half the buildings on the campus weren't there when we were students. And so it's amazing, while the footprint of the college has not expanded geographically, it certainly has expanded internally, where areas that used to be vacant spaces now have buildings on them. But it's kind of a classic-looking campus, and I like the mixture of architecture that you find throughout the campus, particularly the displays of public art. So it's a wonderful place to really become a part of a small community. And I think in terms of what they offer from an academic perspective, you can't get a finer education in a small liberal arts college than what you can find here at Ursinus.